Do you want to learn faster? Do you want to master skills without a lot of outside effort? I'm Justin Hitt from Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips, and if you want to be a better copywriter, I want to share with you a technique that I've used over the years that has improved my ability to speak, has improved my understanding of how copy works, and has driven me towards better outcomes when I'm writing copy. Now, Gary Halbert had similar advice where he advised to write out great sales letters, to literally take the sales letter, write them out in a journal, because now you're going to have that tactile feeling. And he admitted many times that nobody's ever done that. Very few people do it. So what I did after I heard Gary Halbert's advice, and what I had been doing for years in school, is the foundation to what became this podcast. I have more than 500 episodes of this podcast going back almost 23 years, and it's covered many topics from business success to now in this particular channel, how to improve your copywriting skills and earn more in the business of copywriting. So if you're a freelance copywriter, an experienced copywriter, or someone who writes copy for a living, and as you guys know, I write sales copy, technical documents, and then procedural related documents, so training materials. If you want to get better at it, the key is to sift, sort, and find the very best content, and then do exactly what Gary Halbert said, is to either write it out, or what I tend to do is that I will speak it out. So one of the things that I've done for many years is actually to read books out loud into an audio recording device. The reason I did this is because I was on the road quite a bit. I was traveling, I was in airports, I was serving clients. And so I would read the book, practicing my presentation skills, working on having a clear and articulate voice, and I would read the copywriting books. Dan Kennedy's sales letter book, the boron letters, different types of programs. Here's some programs from the ClickFunnels, Russell Brunson. I would take the materials, first doing a quick speed read to make sure it's worth taking the time to record, because it does take some time. But I would basically read these things as if I'm presenting to someone else, and I would do a books on tape to get an audio recording of the program. Now you might be saying, well, Justin, why don't you just buy the audio recording and listen to that? What I was doing instead is reinforcing in my own voice, getting comfortable with how I speak, the messages of the training materials. Now, I have been fortunate to have a library of old classic materials, Think and Grow Rich, books, The Elementary Laws of Advertising by Henry S. Bunting. There's a variety of books. And so I'd read these out loud. And I'd also read books like Up From Slavery, that came from Booker T. Washington, and other motivational books, As a Man Thinks. And I would read it out loud dramatically. Now, I also did this with the Bible, the Quran, and several other religious books or philosophy books. But the key is you're reading it with passion. You're looking for that flow of ideas, that smoothness of delivery that is necessary for a compelling presentation or a persuasive piece of communications. Now remember, communications, when we do salesmanship in print, is the same as sales presentations in a written format, or taking a written format and turning it into a VSL. So we've talked about recycling your marketing. The key in performance here is really getting to embed the ideas in your mind by being curious and driving that outcome. I've come up with it's called reflective self-listening, because it's not a passive listening. It is choosing a book that is of value and really worth your time. It is having the authentic voice, that conversation with the person on the other side. And in this case, if you're recording it for yourself, because you can't take copyrighted materials and turn it into an audiobook. It doesn't work that way. You need to have licensing rights to do that. But you can read out loud to yourself, read to a group, for example, and then listen to it while you're taking notes. Because one of the challenges that happens when we read a book, it doesn't matter how good the book is that you're reading the book or you're reading the program, is that you're reading and writing at the same time, and those sometimes conflict with each other. Let's say it takes 50% of your brain capacity to do the writing and 50% of your capacity to do the reading. Very often when you can switch up the modality, you're going to get better results, because you're going to have the 50% of your listening skills hearing those words, and 50% of your writing skills, writing them down. And so one great example of this is after you go to a conference or a seminar is to bring home your notes and then present them to yourself. Now, what's valuable about this is that while you're presenting to yourself, you can present in a mirror, you can practice with hand gestures. You can say, look, if you record what you do and you listen to it, you're going to have a new perspective and understanding of the materials. Here's why that's so important. Because you're going to improve your effectiveness, your ability to actively listen, because you're going to be honing those skills and practicing. And by the way, and the neurons in your brain are going to get stronger in the areas of topics in which you study. There's a reason why Bible study is reading, listening, meditating on the words, because we're ingraining a behavioral change. See, what I'm doing there is I'm being dramatic. Now, not all my podcasts are dramatic. Sometimes I drone on, but maintaining that energy level is difficult, especially since when we're doing a recording like this, we have to be overly dramatic in order for that to come across in the video. So when you're standing on stage, that's the same thing. You need big gestures. You need big opening things. Now, if you want to practice this with a live audience, you can read the program out loud, listen to the recording and write summary notes, and take those summary notes to a Toastmasters or practice it in front of your sales team, or actually go and say, okay, well, I've read the Wall Street Journal ad about two guys. Why is that the way it is? Can I adapt it for my particular audience? See, the classic copywriting, you can get a book of sales letters, or Denny Hatch has a really good book of sales letters, and you can write it out, and then you can read it out loud, and then you can go back and listen to it, and then you go back and practice it. So there is all these steps that are available, because if you're not applying what you've learned, then you're just wasting a lot of time. Now, again, you have to be strategic about this. Because if you're just reading materials and going over them out loud and you're not taking notes. So one of the things I used to do when I was writing reports for clients is I would write the report and then I would read it out loud with a black marker in my hand. Okay. And I would go through, and if I stumbled on a sentence, I would redact the sentence. Now that means I would put a black line through it. So I've got a printed copy of the materials I'm working for a client. I would black line and redact elements that were difficult to read, that didn't make sense. And now I end up with a piece of paper that has these missing chunks. Well, the missing chunks are the articulation and detail necessary for the reader to move smoothly through the materials and make a buying decision. And so what I'm doing there is I've written down, and I'm not editing it. I'm not being the editor. I'm being the critic. I'm reading it as a different person. And then I'm putting those black lines through it. Now it's printed on one side, because when you put a black line through it, it'll bleed through the back of the page. So it's printed on one side. And then to practice speaking, I would lay those out on a storyboard. I heard this from Lee Miltier after I had been doing it for a while, and it made so much sense. Lee Miltier, when she does an interview or a presentation, will put little notes everywhere. Joan Rivers puts little notes on the floor so that you can keep pace. It's kind of like your song list. So I might read something or read 5 books on a topic, write an outline, do a presentation, which is many times these podcasts, listen to my presentation, jot down an outline, and then ultimately present that to a paid audience. So I can use this methodology as part of my training or my practice to do a presentation. This helps build mindfulness, because sometimes I listen to my podcast and I say, holy crap, that guy is born the just, oh my, it's horrible. And sometimes I do things that are kind of distractions, and other times I do something really, really well. So again, I'm listening to it, I'm journaling it, I'm being mindful while I'm listening, because again, you're hearing yourself speak, you're hearing it through the airwaves rather than through your bones, and it could sound like a different person, but you don't want to be overly critical or overthink what was being said. You want to, again, focus on that active listening, jot down a few notes. Now, what kind of notes are you going to end up jotting down? So let's say you take one of Gary Halbert's letters, and it's the letter where he's looking for a girlfriend, and you write that letter out. There's a personals ad. You write that letter out because you have a dating service product. In order to prevent you from copying what's there, you now read it out loud ad hoc. So that means you've copied it word for word, but you're not reading it out word for word. you're doing what we can fix in editing, but you're doing a pulsing. So you're reading a paragraph. By the way, I have some notes over here, and I'll give you an example of that. So I have number 7 is focus on growth, not perfection. Pause. That gives me time to read over what I've got on my screen. And then instead of saying what's on my screen, I can say, look, if we're overly perfect about this, you're going to spend so much time criticizing what you're reading or criticizing what you're saying rather than just letting go and giving the very best presentation you can. Maybe you're going to see yourself in a monitor, like I have a little monitor right here and I can see myself. And if I look here, my eyes are looking there, but if I look there, my eyes are looking at you. So I have to train myself to look at the camera. And if I'm overly critical in my presentation where I'm looking away, I'm missing the words. Or I'm maybe that commentary didn't transition right. So what we're going to do is, by focusing on growth, is what are the areas that we can improve? What are the areas that we can work on? And in my case, it's looking at the camera and panning so I can see my notes. And so if we're focusing on perfection, it gets in the way. If we're focusing on criticism, it gets in the way. But if we focus on growth, we have opportunity. So now let's go back to what the example I'm giving. Number 7 is focus on growth, not perfection. Here is the sentence that's underneath it. Instead of aiming for flawless recordings, aim for progress in your communication skills. Remember that growth is a continuous journey. So that pause I gave after I introduced number 7 allows me to cue up in my brain this sentence, which is my speaking prompt, and then now I can speak. See, a big problem we have today is that maybe we had somebody else write the presentation. Maybe we used AI to write the presentation, and it's never left the page. So you wrote the perfect sales letter, and it sounds great in your brain, and unfortunately your brain will fill in the blanks if it's not great. But when you articulate it, when you present it, when you get up in front of an imaginary audience or a real audience and present it, and then review the tape, you're going to learn all kinds of things. See, there's a reason why football players and sports athletes at the top of their game will watch the playbacks. Now, I'm a podcaster, and I will admit that I have subscribed to my own podcasts, but I have not listened to all of my own podcasts. Now, sometimes in editing or when I'm writing show notes, I'll listen to things, and I'll do exactly what we're talking about here. I'll outline notes from the program, key highlights, and I'm going to turn those into show notes. But did you know there are times where I'll get questions from the audience, I'll get my show notes or an outline of what was covered in the podcast, and then I'll have 2 or 3 podcasts that are all similar theme and topic, and I can actually weave those together into a special report. So now I can offer my audience a special report. Now, the benefit of this when you're working with clients is that you can now use your time more wisely. And I don't know if you saw that micro look, but number 8 is use your time more wisely. Okay, and then if I pause, it gives you time to catch up. And now I can say, look, if you allocate a short time period to listen and you take a little bit of time to take notes, then what it's going to do is save you a lot of time in the future. And the key to using your time wisely is, again, high value content. So if you want to be a better copywriter, you grab whatever copywriting book you're using, you stand up in front of a room and record this, and you do your presentation. Now, recording is very powerful, and we've talked about that before, because you can create product at the speed of your voice. However, if you're reading my materials, if you're reading Patrick Quinn's materials, if you're reading Gary Halbert's materials, Ted Nicholas's materials, you have to respect their position. So you have to say, this is an excerpt from such and such, and then maybe you can describe why it's important and why it matters. But this particular methodology is more about building that ingrained experience that allows you to speak off the cuff, but also allows you to focus your time and effort on what's beneficial. Now, what's interesting is that over the years, I've listened to my old recordings. So I have cassette tapes with me reading the entire book, and I'm trying to read it dramatically, and I'm trying to read every word clearly and connecting with the audience. And then I'll listen to the audio tape, and it is complete garbage. It is stumbling and distraction and all kinds of things. And that was back in the day. And I can notice that I have a significant improvement over the years, but you have to stick with it. So when you're practicing mindfulness, when you're applying what you learned, when you are seeking feedback not only from yourself, but from other people. So the analytics on your podcast, for example. So if you've read 4 books, you wrote an outline summary, and then you did a podcast about it, you can look at the feedback to see if the topic was a good interaction. And it is really about interaction. I like to highlight successes to the point where it helps me to repeat what works. And then, of course, I like to look for things that are distractions. I really am only worried about the distractions. That exercise where I'm putting the black line through the distractions, I could give that to an editor and they could cut those out of a video presentation because those are distractions. I could take that and try to fill in the blanks. So with the redacted areas, does it still make sense? If it doesn't, fill in the blanks. The key to this exercise is it's not going to hurt you to listen to and practice your own advice. I know it's interesting. It's not something that's done quite often. And it's also going to help you a lot to practice tonality. I have a nasally voice at times. So instead of speaking through the front of my mouth, I try to speak from the back of my throat. And that helps me have more bass in my presentation. These are things you will learn. And I would tell you, it is going to be horrible. You're going to read a sales letter and you're going to say to yourself, why am I such a failure? Why am I so sound like an idiot? And then you're going to do it 100 times. Like Gary Halbert said, you write out 100 letters. And then you're going to start realizing, oh, there's certain patterns that happen here. There's certain articulation and pacing. So articulation is like what I just said when I said articulation. It's making sure the words are clear so that your audience, even with distractions, can understand what you're saying. You do need to be kind to yourself because, like I said, in the beginning, it's going to be a little frustration, a little bit of criticism in a sense, rather than learning and rather than building. And then don't be afraid to publish original materials. That's a big thing that I was afraid of a long time ago. And a lot of times I do a one-off recording for somebody, a client, and I would do this presentation. So maybe they hired me for a keynote, and then I would do a follow-up from all the questions I got in the keynote, and I would do it like a presentation. So maybe it's like 2 or 3 hours of presentation post keynote, and it's all the questions answered. And then I would just sit on that. I would send it to the client. I get kudos from the client. They would be happy and hire me again. But then I have like 2 or 3 hours of audio that I could have given to an editor, and I could have had it transcribed and made a report. I could have had an editor clean it up. And then with today, with the way internet is, I could have published those materials to generate leads and do other stuff. So read your own copy out loud. Give it 24 hours to rest. Read it out loud. And instead of being critical with yourself, redact the elements that were difficult. And you're going to say, Justin, if I black out a sentence because it was hard to read, how am I going to know what was there? That's the whole point. What was there didn't work. Put something else there. Now, I also used highlighters. Highlighters works well too. But again, the redactive method also helps you shorten things up. Another factor you can do, and this builds on the storyboard methods that Lee Miltier talks about, that Dan Kennedy talks about, is that you can take your big sales letter and cut it up into chunks. Now, Gary Halbert recommends when you're writing these sales letters to come back and digest them into index cards. I don't think that's as necessary for someone else's materials, but definitely useful for your own. But basically chunking down your materials into key points and ideas, putting them out in front of you, and doing a video sales letter. And really just testing the idea and concept. Now, again, if you're writing a letter for a client, you can't test their video sales letter, but you can just cold run it. One of the things I've done in the past is I'll sit a client down in the room and I'll say, here's your sales letter. And it'll be like 14-point font, okay? 16-point font. It's a giant stack of paper. And I say, look, we're going to go through this sales letter, and I'm going to listen to you, because this was a presentation they had to stand up in front of an audience. And I'm going to listen to you, and then I'm going to make notes about what's going on. But no matter what, don't stop, okay? Ample pauses, volume, all that stuff as if we had a room full of people, but don't stop. And then anywhere they stop is where the sales letter is difficult. Maybe there's some cognitive bias. Maybe there's something they don't quite agree with. The stoppage is your brain saying, like a deer in the headlights. And that's great. Now we can fix those parts in the letter. Now, one mistake I made is I didn't record those. So I've done 30, 40 of those with clients. I didn't record it. Another thing that we've done with clients too is we take the sales letter. If it's going to be a sales presentation, we listen to many sales presentations, take the notes of the best practices. Then we build a report for them that outlines their best practices. Then we go over with the team itself to talk about the best practices and then give examples out of the audio recordings. And then we role play. Okay. So this is beyond words on the page. And this is actually not even advanced strategy. This is a way you can learn by recording and reviewing and doing the exercise on yourself. But once you're confident with the exercise, you become competent in front of your client to do the same exercise. And they will be leaving the room with high fives and congratulating you and thanking you because it mentally embeds the words in their brain and they can go right off the cuff. Quality salespeople can just go right off the cuff. It's going to help you write faster. It's going to help you write more consistently. It's going to help you with your presentations and proofing. And then ultimately, when you get other people to read your materials out loud, you'll start realizing there's little nuances that can be improved because their brain is going to click on certain things. Sometimes the micro expressions, they'll be reading it and they'll be like, oh my, they'll be like, yeah. And they just get in a role and they put it in. Most of the time they'll get in a role and add words and you want to get those words. But ultimately, again, it is an audio learning technique called reflective self-listening, and specifically start with your own materials. Don't go around teaching this to your clients and stuff like that. You want your clients to pay you to implement a strategy session where you have salespeople stand up and give their best pitches. And then you compare their best pitches in the room with the best practices you got from listening or transcripts of their actual presentations. And then you look at, do they have any disconnects between actual presentations that convert and what they believe to be best practices? And then you get paid a 5-figure deal to go around and reset their thinking. And then you go and have them sell. And next thing you know, the sales are up. And everybody's thinking it's magic, but it really is getting it out of their head onto the paper and then getting it back from the paper out into the open where they can review it, the tips that we gave you here, and then ultimately finishing off the materials with that cognitive addition. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. If you want to learn how to do more than just put words on a page, you want to actually have words that sell, well, you're in the right place. And if you ask your questions, there will be some links below. You can ask questions or you can visit the website at www.adbriefings.co.uk. You will get better at this. You'll be that freelancer that is now upgraded to a consultant, now upgraded to agency, and really transforming the results that your clients get. You're in the right place to do that. I'm going to teach you about copywriting technique. I'm going to teach you about exercises you can do to improve your skill set. And then ultimately, how to position yourself as an expert so that when you go out in the marketplace, you get results. And you get results for your clients and you get paid. Thanks for listening. Again, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips.